So you guys have brought up a really personal perspective of how growing up in America as a Hindu has, been challenging to some extent, just based on how the society reacts to, the fact when you declare yourself as a Hindu, the fact that we often get presented a narrative that is still very tainted by the colonial idea of what Hindus are. And thank you for sharing that experience. I did want to ask, there are multiple layers in this process of building that narrative around the movie, right? So, how did you determine what's an accurate source of information? How do you verify, and like, how do you ensure the veracity of it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So even within Hindu culture, Hindu Dharma, there are many different schools of thought, right? We're the most diverse. Like I said, like there's not one set of beliefs that we follow. That's why we can't even call it like a religion. So when people ask me like, "Oh, are you religious?" Like that question doesn't really make sense to me because we're much broader than that. Um, so I think the main thing here is whenever we get information, we need to follow sort of the epistemology that Hinduism uses, Hindu culture uses. So what I mean by that is, for example, if we look at the way that knowledge is processed in Hindu Dharma, right? The way that the Vedas are like the ultimate truth, and every school of thought agrees upon that. And the reason why we chose rivers actually is because if you look at the Rig Veda, for example, they mention worship of like very natural elements, right? They have the worship of fire, they have the worship of rivers, for example. So the worshiping of nature, the worshiping of Prakriti, rivers, is is at the very core, is at the very core of Hindu Dharma. And this is sort of like an eternal truth that every school of thought in Hindu Dharma agrees with. There's no sort of debate around the philosophy of it because it goes back to the Rig Veda, which is the oldest living text that we know of in the world. So like we've us following the epistemology is very different. But once we go into like like the more deeper levels of it, right, we're still trying to go back to our texts and look at our itihasas or upanishads for information. And whenever we use online sources, we have a team of advisors and experts that we always cross check it with, people that have been studying this stuff for years, to make sure we get an accurate sense. Like Ria can maybe talk about the research that she's been doing a bit.
Yeah. So as for my research, there's many different sources where I can go. I can obviously go to the internet. There's obviously a lot of bias on the internet as well. So what I do is I take my research that I find really interesting. I find that is really pertinent, really relevant to the area that we are looking at right now, and I take it back to our team, and we discuss it. It's really a conversational they're usually really conversational meetings, and they're really insightful as well. Everyone can just piggyback on top of each other. And then, like Praneeth said, we cross check the sources of our research in order to make sure that they're credible, right? Because we don't want uncredible sources going into our documentary. But being on the research team is really insightful as well because it's not just doing independent research, it's also having conversations and having important conversations that we should have to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And personally, being on the research team has been a great decision because it has allowed me to become a better learner and become a better Hindu. Because as I've researched and as I've discussed information, I've learned that Hindu culture is very complex. There's a lot of gray area, and there's always something to learn. So I think learning that has been really a really important aspect to my journey as a researcher on this team. Because there's no end to knowledge. There's always something to learn, and I think that is a really important value that I've learned over the course of these past few months.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.